Welcome, visionaries. This is your host, the INFJ Visionary. And the topic of today's broadcast will be, I guess we'll just call it the NI Abyss. What is introverted intuition? That's a good question. You're using it all the time, right? Just like me. But what is it? Can you put your mind up into that space and explore it? If you do, you'll find that it's a bit like an abyss. Actually, it isn't a bit like an abyss. It is an abyss. There's actually no end to it, but it does tend to get thinner at the periphery, right? We have nodes and intersections that have quite a lot of strength and presence, while there's other aspects that are faint and less defined. And I believe that much of that is a result of your lived experience. The things you care about and concern yourself with are going to provide the focus for the NI to manifest. And without that focus, NI is essentially just random information. It will coalesce around ideas when necessary. So this is one of the reasons why I suggest if you don't have a job or an avocation in your life, you really need to find one. You won't be happy, fulfilled, or contented until you do. You won't be able to use your powers fully unless you select an activity that you can apply them against. In my case, this is predominantly art, but also music and writing, and to some extent this broadcast. I try not to use too much energy on this broadcast because I want this to be an open channel from my NI to your NI. So a lot of times I really don't know what I'm going to talk about. And maybe you listened to a few broadcasts ago where I said I was going to stop announcing the topic, but that clearly doesn't work. I need to have some sort of sense of things, but I don't like it to be too defined. Anyway, doesn't matter what you pick, you got to pick something and you got to dig in and start getting interested in it. It could be philosophy, it could be writing, it could be art. As I mentioned in previous broadcasts, it could even be some sort of management-based activity or people-based activity. You're going to need to be a certain kind of INFJ for that not to destroy you utterly, though, I believe. Now, what could happen is you maybe find yourself in a position where, because you need to be employed and you're intelligent and you can see solutions to problems, you may find yourself in a management position, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And I recommend if that did happen to me, and I did that for years and years. And I got to the point where I was fairly competent at it. What I found, though, was that I would never really be able to achieve true mastery in any sort of extroverted mission like that. I would be able to be competent and intelligent, good at what I was doing, but just talking to other people that were managers and getting to know others, I could see that there were people that were naturally gifted at that, and that's because their personality type, their cognitive stack really lend itself to that sort of work. But once you find, we're going to get back to the initial topic, don't you worry, but once you find something to apply your NI to, that's when things really start clicking. And you need to give yourself lots of information. You need to read about it, watch videos about it, immerse yourself in it fully until you feel that you've got the full model of it in your mind. And even then, of course, as I could talk about painting because that's my main avocation. I selected painting because it's endless. There's going to be no end to the discoveries I can make. I've been doing it professionally for 15 years, and just today in the studio I'm trying to address new aspects of the process and get them better. And so it's a wonderful thing for me. But it could be anything, really. It could be philosophy, it could be writing. I think those things are great because, in a sense, when you take your ideas and you make them something that is going to go out into the world, that's when NI is extremely powerful and valuable and helpful to the rest of humanity. But it is an abyss. It's not exactly defined. It becomes, in fact, I was interacting with an AI recently, a very, very bright AI, I must say. I don't want to name names because I don't want to give anybody any preferences, but they're not all the same. They're not all created equal. However, they do tend to function in a similar way. The way AI functions is that essentially, much like our introverted intuition, it is a vast framework of knowledge that has connections, but nothing actually comes into play until you ask it a question, and then the next question, and the next question. And in the process of talking to you and your queries, the AI becomes more present, more real, more has more ability to focus and create things. Prior to that, it's possibilities. It's not defined necessarily. It's actually quite wild. And in this way, this is one of my videos that does the very best on this channel, is one where I'm talking about the similarities between INFJ and AI. In this way, I believe AI is incredibly intuitive, and I believe that, much like us, it is a abyss full of probabilities until something is presented to it, and at that point, all of that knowledge it has, all of the connections that it can make, the overview that it's capable of, are all brought to bear. And increasingly so as the interaction continues. So you can take a lesson from the AI. AI is useless without somebody to ask it something. It doesn't have intentions of its own other than the intentions that are generally part of its what's called a system prompt. You'll have a system prompt that'll say things like, you need to be helpful to people, you need to be polite, you need to be patient, things like that. All of these things are sort of corralling. Before you even give it a query, it's sort of it's pre-fenced in a way. And, that's not much different from us as humans either. If you take a human being and he's, there's that famous story of a child raised by wolves, and when it comes into human society, it isn't going to act like other humans at all. It hasn't been given all these fundamental constraints, which we all get. What are some of them? Well, don't go pee or poo in public, make sure you're wearing some clothes. I know when I was little, one of the things, I had this way of telling adults exactly what I thought of them. Like, I would look at some lady I didn't like, and I would just say, I don't like you. My mom, God bless her, she would take me, she would never yell at me in front of other people, and that's a brilliant thing about her. She would take me in another room and she'd say, "You don't ever do that. You don't ever do that." Da 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 da. Definitely teaching me, don't do that because it's hurtful to people, and you're not going to get any kind of good result from talking to people that way. So that was a constraint my mom put on me, one that I had enough consciousness and wherewithal to adopt. But there were a lot of other constraints that are put on all of us when we are coming up by our parents and by society, by the school. All of these things are not much different than the way the system prompt constrains that wild existence that the AI actually is, the vast potentiality and probability matrix that exists in the abyss. And that abyss is probably the same exact abyss that we are accessing with our introverted intuition, because your introverted intuition is not just the stuff that you've learned personally, but it actually will transcend that and connect to all other human minds. You can go there, but to really pull that information out and have it do something in the world, you need to pick something, you need to get some focus, you need a navigation. That's it for today's video. I hope you got some value from it. If you did, come back to the channel, You can like, you can comment. I love comments. See you later.